Hey everybody, welcome back. Just getting things set up here. So, welcome to class, and I hope you guys are doing good. Okay. 1 second. All right, everybody. Well, here we go. Just a few seconds until our meeting begins. Welcome back. Good to see you guys. Hey, Sebastian. Hey, Megan. Just putting my phone onto the meeting. Hey, everybody. Fernanda, and me, and everybody else. Always good to see you guys. Okay. All right, guys. Well, it's 4 o'clock, so welcome back again. And let's just jump back into our material. We have a few more fallacies that we need to learn about today. I wanted to start with the question, what was the last time we did last time? Did we get all the way through the red herring? That's my question. Did we get our notes for the red herring? And yes? Okay, good. So we got all of the fallacies of relevance last time. You guys know that the homework is due today, so if you didn't send it in to me, make sure just to send it to me right away so that there's no late penalty applied to it. The second homework, the one that involves the fallacies from page 151 and 2. And this is a homework that I can grade very fast just because it's really just all or nothing. Either you wrote the name that the fallacy is or you didn't. So I'm going to turn around and grade these very fast. The midterms are pretty much done. So tomorrow I'm going to send an announcement to the class that just says that I'm done with those things and that you can email me to receive your score on any of the assignments or your overall class grade. I've mentioned this a few times, and I'm just going to reiterate it, that I collect your scores and I keep them in a physical and an electronic record, but I don't post them to like gradebook or something. You have to check in with me. I want you to do that when you're seeking out your score, but they're ready anytime. So starting tomorrow, you can check in on your midterm, the second homework, and the other things too. And we then look forward to Tuesday where you guys have a little quiz on these fallacies. So today's a key meeting where we finalize the last category of fallacies, and then you'll have all the material that you need with the lecture plus your book to do well on that quiz that's coming on Tuesday. Okay, so let's go on and talk about these new fallacies, but one last quick review of the things that we did last time, just to kind of keep the continuity with the last meeting. So last lecture was about the fallacies of relevance, the ones that were utilized in the homework assignment. And there are 8 different fallacies of relevance. So one is the personal attack, the sometimes known as ad hominem fallacy. That is a fallacy where instead of responding to your opponent's argument with a counter argument, you attack them personally. So like if somebody said to you, I believe that a policy which imposes more tax on the highest earners is a better social policy for the citizens of the United States because we have underfunded programs and then there's a lot of wealth accumulating at the top and nobody doing anything with it. And somebody responds to them and says, you know what, I don't agree with you at all because your breath smells horrible, or I don't agree with you at all because doesn't your dad work for the government or something, and doesn't that mean that you don't really have a reliable opinion on the matter? So anytime it gets personal, basically, and you push back against the person's argument by attacking them in a way that does not refer to the argument, but instead is something either about them that's abusive or circumstantial, that would be an ad hominem fallacy. There's also the appeal to force. Okay, that's when you try to use scare tactics or threats to make the person agree with you or to back down from their own position. So like if somebody said they make a political argument or a moral argument or a theoretical argument about something, scientific argument, you don't agree with the conclusion, but instead of making a real response, you just try to threaten the person, say, I wouldn't say that if I were you, or else, and then some type of implied or real threat is given. Okay, appeal to pity. That is when you try to use pity to get the individual you're interacting with to show you a little bit of special treatment. But it's a case where the appeal to pity is not relevant to the broader circumstances. So like a person cheated in an exam, the professor catches them and is going to cite them for plagiarism, but they just start saying, I don't know, when I was a little kid, my dad never played catch with me, and that always bothered me to this day. And the psychological trauma from all the abandonment issues has made me a bad student that cheats. Come on, give me a break. Something like that. Anyway, Alec, you're saying on the homework, you said personal attack, not ad hominem. Oh yeah, that's fine. They're synonyms. So those are both fair game. Either way of referring to it is okay. And Michael, sometimes it seemed like it could be more than one. It was some small differences to distinguish them. Oh yeah, some of them were maybe close calls, but there's always one that's the dominant interpretation in any single case. But when we get this answer key distributed tomorrow, then we'll talk about it more after the quiz and everything. I don't want to reveal the answers just yet because there could be some students which submitted a little bit late, and if they do that tonight, for example, I don't want them to benefit from getting notice about what the answers could be. But yeah, I mean, if it was hard, whatever, it's a challenge. You're being challenged, so that's a good thing. Okay, so next, popular appeal. Jasmine, sorry if you mentioned this already, but for the homework, did you send out confirmation emails? The homework, yes, I have been sending those out. But did you just mail yours to me today or yesterday? When did you send me yours? If you sent it in the past 10 minutes or something, I have not been able to send confirmations within the past 10 or 15 minutes. So that's why I'm asking, when did you deliver yours, if you have? Let me know, Jasmine. What do you think? Alec, you got your confirmation back. Yeah, this cat is insane. You sent it last night? Okay, let me I'll double check for you, okay? Give me 1 second then. Actually, here we go. Peachy, she's been attacking this little alligator on my shirt like all afternoon relentlessly, so it's pretty funny. Sorry. No. Okay. I have another window that I have to open on my MacBook, so just give me 2 seconds to get to that. Peachy, I'm gonna have to put you in the other room. Okay. Wait, sorry, wrong inbox. Okay, bear with me, not to be concerned. All right, so I'll give you your answer in 2 seconds here. Oh yes, I see it, and I also see your other note to me. So yeah, I've got it. Not to worry, Jasmine. It must have just been in a flurry of incoming messages. And probably because you also had another message to me, that means that I was attending to the other information in that. But okay, all right, got you, Jasmine. Not to worry, you're good. So everybody, like I'm saying, I try to confirm every received submission as I get them. Sometimes when there's a lot of messages that come in rapid fire, I only get to see it when I double check it on the next day or whatever. But not to worry, nothing's getting lost if it's properly sent. But I try to give the fast confirmation. So thanks for letting me know, Jasmine. Popular appeal, you appeal to popularity. It's like saying this is the best product because most people buy it, or this is the best movie because it's the #1 box office receipt. Appeal to ignorance. Somebody says something's true just because nobody's been able to prove that it's false. Yeah, like there was one question, for example, in your guys' homework. I guess I could just talk about at least one or two. I think, didn't it say, we can't say that Iran is developing weapons of mass destruction because nobody can prove that they are not? Isn't that one of the problems? I think that was like number B. Here I am looking at it. Yeah, no one has any conclusive proof that Iran has a viable nuclear weapons program. Since no one can prove that they do, therefore we can safely assume that they don't have nuclear weapons. So like that would be an example. used in the homework. Hasty generalization, when a person jumps to a general conclusion, like a universal statement based on limited sample size or a biased or unrepresentative sample. If I look into your guys' homework, let me see if I can find a quick case of that. Oh yeah, so like for example, here it says, after reading the introduction to the chapter, it's obvious to me that all religious groups on campus are destructive and should be banned. After all, look at what happened to Shannon Townsend. So like, you know, they're referring to the introduction to the chapter where they mention one young woman who got involved in a cult. And then if you use that one case to generalize that every religious organization is destructive and should be banned, that would be a hasty generalization. Okay, and then straw man and red herring. Straw man is when you misrepresent your opponent's argument to make it seem easier to refute. And then red herring is changing the topic to something else. So like the first question, the legal drinking age in America should be lowered to 18. After all, it's legal for you to fight and die for your country when you're 18. There's a red herring. Because these are two separate issues. One is about age eligibility to drink, one is about the age of eligibility to fight in war. And it's possible to think that someone's, you know, able-bodied and strong, therefore they can serve to defend the country, but not mature enough intellectually to make decisions about drinking. It's two separate issues. Red herring. Straw man. Let's see a quick one from the list. Oh yeah, like feminists want to have co-ed sports. That would be an example of straw man. Letter D. Feminists argue for equality of men and women. That means men and women sharing the same bathrooms and locker rooms. But that is ridiculous, so we should reject feminism. Obviously, that's not a correct representation of the argument in favor of feminism. People are not saying let us integrate sports leagues and dorms and so on, or frats and sororities. Okay, so just a little review on that. But we have a little bit more to do today. And that's why I'm going to start talking to you guys about the third and final category of fallacies, and that's the fallacies of unwarranted assumption. Okay, so fallacies of unwarranted assumption. They're labeled as fallacies of unwarranted assumption because what they all have in common is they are arguments where there's some assumption in it that's not supported by the evidence. So when an argument includes an assumption that is not supported by evidence. Okay, fallacies of unwarranted assumptions. So warrant is kind of like a term which refers to having justification or evidence. So unwarranted is not being justified, not being based on good evidence. So these kinds of fallacies are grouped together because they all include some type of assumption that has been made without enough supporting evidence to back the assumption up. And so there's going to be 7 of these different fallacies of unwarranted assumptions. So I'll list them first just so you can see the names of all of them, and then we will go one by one through them with some definitions and examples. Okay, so we've got, first of all, begging the question. And there's inappropriate appeal to authority. Okay, inappropriate appeal to authority. Then there's loaded question fallacy. Right. False dilemma. Then there's questionable cause. Okay, and then 2 more, slippery slope, and finally naturalistic fallacy. Okay, so here is the agenda pretty much for today, to just go over these 7 terms. These are all, again, members of the unwarranted assumption fallacy family. So they're all grouped together because they all contain some unwarranted assumptions, but they're a little different each one. So we'll start off with begging the question then. And I'll erase the others, but we'll get to them one at a time. Okay, so what is begging the question? Let's go over that. Okay, so with begging the question, in this fallacy, the issue is that one of the premises of the argument is simply a reworded, slightly reworded version of the conclusion. Okay, and when that happens, it makes the argument invalid. All right, so I'll put it here. When one of the premises of an argument is a reworded version of the conclusion. All right, when one of the premises of an argument is a reworded version of the conclusion, that's called begging the question. So let's remember, with the argument, you have a conclusion. That's the claim that you're trying to prove to be true. And then the premises are supposed to be the evidence that supports that claim, that backs it up. But the evidence obviously cannot be the same thing as the conclusion. You can't just say, you know, California is the best state because California is the best state. You know, that's just begging the question. That's saying the same thing twice. Now, with a real begging the question example, the person usually doesn't literally say the exact same words, but they say something that is equivalent to it. So it would be like saying, California is the best state, and your friend asks you, well, really, if that's what you think, tell me what is the argument you have to convince me. And you say, you want to hear an argument? Okay, that California is the best state, I'll tell you right now, here's my argument. If you look at all 50 states, all other 49, they're worse, and therefore California is the best. Now, do you understand what I just said, guys? Like, what does it mean to say that out of all 50 states, the other 49 are not as good? It means nothing other than to say that California is the best one out of all 50. But we have not been given a reason yet. Now, if you want to give a reason for that conclusion, you could give reasons. You could say we have one of the biggest economies, and we have some of the best industries, best weather, some great metropolitan cities and schools. You could go on and on with all kinds of reasons, but you can't just say it's the best because all the other ones are worse. That is just saying it's the best because it's the best, which is not like a real argument. It's just repeating the same claim over again. So what about some other examples maybe that we can draw on from our book? Suppose that, here's one from the book, okay? So suppose this is the way the argument looks. Just one premise and then this conclusion below. Say the conclusion is that capital punishment is wrong. So that's the person's position. Capital punishment is wrong. And then you ask, okay, well, what is the argument? And they say, oh, I'll tell you why. It's because it is immoral for the state to inflict death as a punishment for a crime. Okay, so I've said here, you see the argument. It says, premise, it's immoral for the state to inflict death as a penalty. Therefore, capital punishment is wrong. So why is this a circular begging the question argument? Because, okay, what is a synonymous way of referring to capital punishment? Like, what is capital punishment, in other words? It's the same thing as talking about what? Like, literally, it's the death penalty. It's when the state uses death as a punishment. So to say capital punishment is wrong is to say that the death penalty, and now what's the word immoral? Well, immoral and wrong are just, again, they're equivalent terms. They mean the same thing. So this just says, even though it looks slightly different at a first glance, it's really just saying the death penalty is wrong because the death penalty is wrong. And that's, again, it begs the question. We're waiting for the question to be answered. Why, though, is it wrong? And you can't just answer the question by repeating the statement for a different reason. There could be solid arguments why the death penalty is wrong. Some people believe it's wrong. I mean, Gavin Newsom, our governor, has placed a moratorium on the death penalty in the state of California, so there's no application of that penalty in our state anyway, even though it's available as a tool in the criminal justice system federally. And, you know, people who oppose the death penalty have a lot of different reasons. Some people think that there's bias in the way the sentence is given out. Some people will say that it doesn't act as an effective deterrent. Some people will just say it's the human right to life is sacred and should never be, you know, violated no matter what. So there's all kinds of arguments, but you can't just say it's wrong because it's wrong because it's wrong because it's wrong. You have to give a different reason. So that would be begging the question. Sometimes they call begging the question circular argument fallacy. That's just another term for it. And the reason they call it a circular argument is because the premise, like, it is the conclusion. So you're asking what's the evidence for this, and you're pointed towards the premise, but the premise is the same thing as the conclusion. So the argument kind of goes in a circle like a cat chasing its tail type of thing. Okay, maybe I'll give one more example of this while we're on this topic, just to really reinforce it. How about if somebody says, okay, like they're just saying abortion is wrong is the conclusion, and the premise is it is immoral. Sorry, I'm going to spell it right, of course. It is immoral to deliberately terminate a pregnancy. Okay, so like this is obviously a circular argument as well. This is another case of begging the question because the conclusion is that abortion is wrong. But what reason has been given to support this? The reason is it's wrong because terminating a pregnancy is immoral, but deliberately terminating a pregnancy just is to get an abortion. And again, saying that something is immoral is none other than saying it's wrong. So, you know, yet another example for you to think about. And maybe one more, which is also in the book. By the way, there are, like, again, there's good arguments that are not invalid, that are not fallacious, that can be made towards the conclusion that abortion is wrong. You know, like I sometimes teach the contemporary moral issues class. And when I teach that class, abortion is one of the topics. And so you read the literature on either side, pro-life, pro-choice. So there's solid arguments out there. Some people will say because the fetus has potential to have the quality of being a person like us who can talk and reason, and therefore having that potential should give you the right to life right way back at the moment of conception. You know, some people will say it's because at the moment of conception, there's a full set of genetic information from both parents, and therefore this is a unique individual who should be treated as a person. I don't know. There's arguments, basically, is what I'm saying, but that would not be the best one that I just had here. And then another case, possibly, which is also in our book. So to just wrap up the last example on this. So suppose this argument, the conclusion is that God exists. And let's say the first premise is that God wrote the Bible. Well, no, let me say this. Yeah, God wrote the Bible, and the Bible says God exists. So therefore, God exists. Now, which one of these premises assumes already that the conclusion is true? Like, in these two claims here, the conclusion is, well, in which one of these two claims is the existence of God already presupposed? Because the conclusion is that God exists. So the premises shouldn't, like, assume that before we get to the conclusion, but at least one of them does. It's the first one, right, Jasmine? Because what does it say? It says, who wrote the Bible? God did. Well, if God wrote the Bible, then he had to exist. A non-existent thing can't write anything, right? So if God wrote the Bible, it already assumes the existence of God in the very first premise. So this one might be a little bit, it's not as immediately obvious which premise begs the question, but if you just think about it, you can clearly see that it's the first one. So yeah, circular arguments all around, and basically you just have to make sure that people aren't providing you with a reworded version of the conclusion when they state an argument. That can happen anytime the conclusion is a definition of a key term in the premises. So like if the conclusion says something about the death penalty, and in the premises there's another way of synonymously referring to the death penalty that doesn't exactly use those words. So you always have to be alert to arguments that have that fallacy in them. Okay, so next up, there's inappropriate appeal to authority. And, well, I'll write this down first, but I wanted to say one more thing about the last one. The example that was given by the book about, God wrote the Bible and it says he exists, so God exists. It's a circular argument, but I want to be clear again, there are very good arguments for the existence of God that are classical arguments, and so it's not like every argument for God's existence is somehow fallacious or invalid. There's the ontological argument, the cosmological argument, the argument from design, just to name a few, So there's a whole wide literature of highly sophisticated arguments for theism, and there's also objections to those, but I'm just saying none of the examples I point out of a fallacy are meant to minimize the conclusion of the fallacious argument. It could be argued for in another way, which would be better. Okay, so next there's inappropriate appeal to authority. So this is when you appeal to some person's opinion to support your argument, but the problem is that that person is not really an expert or an authority in that field. Okay, so when you appeal to someone's opinion to support your argument, but this is the main problem, but this person is not an authority or expert on that topic. Okay? So sometimes people try to cite the views of others as evidence that what they believe is correct also. The problem is that sometimes the citation of the other person's opinion is not the right type of person's opinion to cite, like a person who has no relevant expertise or special knowledge about that subject matter. Like for example, if someone said, well, all these public health experts are saying that we should engage in social distancing and using masks to mitigate the spread of the coronavirus. But I was just hanging out with my buddy the other day, just a bartender, and he was telling me none of that is true because he works with a bunch of people. He doesn't know anybody that's sick. So, don't tell me that I need to wear a mask. What's the problem here? Well, he's citing the viewpoint of his bartender friend, and with no disrespect to people that are bartenders, they have a lot of expertise and knowledge when it comes to making drinks, when it comes to, operating the bar, and all of the little ins and outs of that type of workplace. But they're out of their depth when they're starting to render an opinion on something that they don't have the training, the expertise, education, or knowledge to talk about. So that would be inappropriate appeal to authority. There's other examples given in the book. So let's see what some of those could be. My priest says that genetic engineering is not safe, so I believe that all the experiments in that field should be stopped. And the book says, unless the priest also happens to be an expert in genetic engineering, before accepting his argument as correct, you should ask for reliable and authoritative evidence. So, sometimes you trust a person in one field, and then that causes you to give too much validity to their opinion on other subjects that they're no expert on. So you want to talk to a priest. The priest can probably tell you all sorts of very important things about the history of theism, the Bible, the interpretation of Scripture, but they're not a scientist, and so they really don't have the type of opinion that you should put on a par with the opinion of a real scientist in the field. Sometimes it's the person's parents, it's like, hey, at school they were teaching me about evolution, but my mom or dad who just works blah, blah, blah as a real estate investor said this is not true. So I just don't listen to my teachers and I listen instead to my parents. But the teacher who teaches the material is by definition an expert in the material and an authority on it. So we need to defer to the proper authorities and not those that don't have expertise. I kind of find that to be ironic, right? People have all this skepticism of authority when it's actually real. And then they give all kinds of respect to the opinions of people who don't deserve it, So it's like you're going to disrespect, not you, of course, but the poor critical thinkers of the world will disrespect the opinions of those that are working in a field that dedicated their life to it. That's what they do for a living. And they don't hand these degrees out on the street corner. You have to demonstrate your worth through a very tough gauntlet of academic evaluation. Those are the people who we say, oh, I don't know, are they telling the truth? But, some random salesperson or guy that runs a blog can get you to agree with him. So anyway, we have to make sure to cite the right type of evidence, and the opinion of a person that's not an expert given as evidence is inappropriate appeal to authority. Here's another point that's made in the text. Sometimes distinguished titles cause the mistaken perception that the person's an expert on everything. So like if a person has a title like doctor, professor, officer, lieutenant, whatever it may be, then that may cause unwarranted trust in all their opinions. Like I'm a doctor, okay? Like I have a PhD, and so I have a research-based doctorate, and on my checks and stuff it says Dr. Vulich, and it's like a thing, it's my title. But if you go to somebody and you say, hey, Dr. Vulich, my philosophy professor, was telling me that, I don't know, helium is one of the heavier elements in the periodic table, so that must be true, you'd be citing the wrong person, because I'm not a good person with chemistry. That was definitely my worst subject ever back in school. So, I'm not the one to talk to about that stuff. I know a lot about philosophy, critical thinking, the history of philosophy and of ideas, but you don't want to cite me as the expert if you're dealing with another field, okay? So anyway, that's the second one here, the inappropriate appeal to authority. Okay, and so we're going to go on to the next. The next one in this list is the loaded question fallacy. Okay, loaded question is kind of a little funny. It's like, when these questions are asked, it's a type of question that assumes something that should not be assumed. So it's when somebody asks a question which assumes the answer to a different question that they did not ask. Okay, so to a different unasked question. All right. So again, it's like a type of question that when it's posed, there's a fallacy in the way the question is stated, because it assumes information that is not known to the questioner. So how about this? If someone that's not so familiar with you, just getting to know you a little bit, asks you, so who are you dating right now? How's that a loaded question? What's the assumption built into that question that should not be assumed without better knowledge? Someone just asks, who are you seeing? How could that be a loaded question? It assumes the person's dating someone at all, that they have a relationship, and if they're single or whatever, then you can't give an answer. You have to instead say, no, I have to reject the premise of your question, which is that I'm seeing a person, and it's just a question of who, because I'm not seeing anybody, right? So that would be like a loaded question. Somebody asks, when did you go to bed last night? Now, I guess that could be a loaded question, because the assumption that's found in that question is the what? When did you go to bed last night? I'm asking, and I'm assuming by asking this what information maybe that I don't know. Yeah, that you went to bed at all, right? Some people, especially I know a lot of you young guys, stay up a lot of times or pull all-nighters, whatever. So if that happens, then maybe the person didn't go to bed at all and they can't give an answer about the time that they did go to bed. Who was your first kiss or something like that? You know, maybe the person never had one and the question assumes too much. Let's see. Other examples from the book. This is kind of an interesting one. So the question is being asked, do you think that the death penalty should only be allowed for people that are over 18? Do you think it should only be allowed for people that are over 18? What's the assumption behind this question that makes it a loaded question? The question again, do you think the death penalty should just be for those that are 18 and older? What's being assumed by asking that? Essentially, the question is like, how old do you think a person should have to be before we can execute them? And so, yeah, Eduardo, that the person is comfortable with the whole concept of the death penalty in general, period. Some people don't believe anyone should be executed at any age. Ryan, you say your video is lagging based on the chat, and the answers are popping up before I ask a question, so you can't participate. Well, I don't know. I'm getting some feedback. Maybe your Wi-Fi has some connection issues for the moment, but we'll just do our best. Try to engage if you can, and if not, you know, others will pick up the slack for you. And you know, it's not going to be perfect 100% of the time with everybody's connection, but you know, we just make do with and manage as best we can. Maybe if you refresh, Caesar is giving you some advice, this could help. Or maybe if you log off the stream, close some windows, and then come back or something, you'll get a little bit better connection. Worst case scenario, what I've done, and I don't know if you have the ability to do this, is to turn your cell phone into a hotspot. And then if you do that, you'll be on mobile data instead of Wi-Fi. And sometimes that's a little more reliable depending on your service. So yeah, thanks everybody. We'll just, you know, do what we can. Yeah, I was going over loaded question examples, and I talked about the death penalty one. This is a funny story. Okay, so here, this is like an actual real life example of loaded question. So way back in the day, it's like it's stuck in my memory because it's like kind of a vivid event. When I was a little kid, right, I had like one of my school friends that was also my neighbor. Me and some other kids from school would hang out at their house sometimes and just, you know, play video games, whatever kids do. And so I was over there, and one of the other kids saw my friend's mom and didn't know her that well. And just by looking at her, this little kid was like, hey, when are you having this baby? Like, when is the baby due? Because she's like, you're pregnant. But, okay, when's the baby due? How is that a loaded question? What's being assumed in that case? Yeah, it was not, she was annoyed for sure. Yeah, well, okay, Lily, I see from earlier, but the assumption that she's pregnant, right? And she wasn't pregnant, so she was very annoyed at the child, kind of made her feel bad about her body and stuff. So yeah, anyway, be careful with the loaded questions. You know, when you ask a question, don't make an assumption before you know the information. Another example of this, to add one more, is that sometimes in law and in the courts, we can get into trouble if we don't pay attention to when we're getting a leading question asked to us. So like the officer pulls you over and he says, tell me how many drinks have you had tonight? How many drinks have you had? Right? Well, that's a loaded question because it's assuming that you've had any, and maybe you haven't, and they're just trying to get you to confess to something maybe without knowing all the facts. Or in a court of law, the lawyer is giving cross-examination and you're on the witness stand, and you know, you've pled not guilty, but he has one of those dramatic courtroom episodes where he stands before you and the judge and jury and he says, look, for the first time, why don't you just tell us all why you did it? You know, just come clean. Tell us why you did it. You're being interrogated, right? But your position is you haven't done it. So why you did it, asking for the motive, is a loaded question because it assumes that the act was committed, and all we need to know is what the motive of it was. Okay, so a couple of different examples of that. Okay, so we're going to go with the next one, and next we've got false dilemma. False dilemma. So sometimes it's called fallacy of false choice. Sometimes I've heard it even called fallacy of false dichotomy. But in our book, they go with the label false dilemma. Just know that there's other equivalent labels that you'll see sometimes out there. Well, what is it? The false dilemma is when you reduce the responses to a complex issue to a binary either or choice, okay? All right, so that's the false dilemma fallacy. So let's see. How about, you've heard this maybe argument given before. So where do you stand on our country? I just want to know where you're at. Do you love it, or do you hate it and you should just leave? Love it or leave it, which one is it? What's your view? How's that a false dilemma? It ignores middle ground possibilities. Like, what's something that is intermediate between either loving it or leaving it? It's what a lot of people actually do. And what is that middle ground that's being ignored by presenting it in these sort of polarized extremes? Love it or leave it. How about another option? Like what? Tell me, what do you think? If someone says to you, what do you think, love it or leave it? Be neutral about it. That's one possibility, sure. Like just meh, you know, like I don't exactly have passionate love, but I'm not like a hater about it. I just feel like I don't want to leave. It's convenient to be here. Maybe I'd like to reform it a little bit and stay. So, you know, love it or leave it ignores the widespread possibility of just staying put and raising your concerns like you should be able to do in a democratic system. Exactly, Ryan, right? So, so there you go. That love it or leave it ignores that middle ground, and that's mentioned here in the book. The argument makes the unwarranted assumption that the only alternative to accepting U.S. policies is to move to another country. In fact, there are many alternatives, including working to change or improve policies. In this case, the fallacious reasoning is reinforced by the one of us, one of them cognitive error, so they talk about that as well. So when a person says something that kind of expresses all or nothing thinking, and it leaves no room for middle ground, that is a false dilemma. Like, well, sometimes people who have like an eating disorder may get caught up in this kind of fallacious way of thinking that either I'm eating nothing or anything I eat is just way excessive. So it's either all or nothing, binge or purge. But obviously there are middle ground alternatives between being like totally obese or just rail thin, you know? What if I ask you, where are you at politically? Are you on the hardcore far right, or are you way on the liberal left? You know, what is it? Is it socialism, or like, I don't even know what you want to call the pejorative equivalent on the fascism or something, or like, I don't know. I mean, that's probably not fair, but you know, like, what if someone expresses to you like only two stark options, like the most hardcore conservative or the most liberal lefty? Is that a false dilemma? Is it, are you a Republican or a Democrat? Is this a false dilemma? If so, tell me why. Yeah, it's to ignore the moderation in the possible middle. Me, for example, like I'm not declared I declined to state a party, right? I'm unaffiliated, so I'm like an independent voter. If somebody were to ask me, you know, which of the two big political parties are you in, I would say, well, it's a false dilemma, isn't it? There's all kinds of people that are members of other parties, you know, third parties, and some that just decline to state, like me. So, you know, we have false dilemma thinking in political matters, social matters, and sometimes just personal stuff. What if somebody has this thought, this person that I'm interested in, I don't know how they feel about me. Do they love me or do they hate me? You know, are they in love with me right now, or do they think that I'm just disgusting and I'm weird? That's a false dilemma too, right? Because it could be that the person is just neutral, or that they don't have any kind of powerful passions. So like, with me or against me, false dilemma. Just neither one, just kind of neutral. Okay, so basically, watch out for like these tough either/or questions that kind of put you on the spot. Sometimes the right response to such questions is not to give the answer the person wants, but instead to accuse them of the false dilemma fallacy. If somebody says to you, like, do you believe we should go to war, that we should get rid of the military or something, or you think we should spend more on the military or just abolish it, you can tell the person, look, that's not the full range of options. You're kind of trying to rope me into a false dilemma here, but that's not true. There's more possibilities than two. Sometimes, and this is what I'll close this one with, sometimes the results of surveys and polls can be infected with this fallacy, because if the design of the poll questions is not sufficiently nuanced to give you the actual range of responses that are realistic, then the results of the poll might not be reliable. Like, for example, they mention that here, pollsters may unwittingly commit this fallacy. How options are presented in a question can influence the response. For example, in one poll, people were asked this question: do the courts deal too harshly or not harshly enough with criminals? Well, you're only giving people two options. Either it's too much or not enough. And when they were only given those two options, 6% said too harsh and 78% said not harsh enough. But when they gave them a third alternative, do not have enough information to say, 29% chose that middle alternative, with only 60% now saying not harsh enough. So you get a way different readout of the distribution of public opinion if you took the first poll to have the same credibility as the second one, just because the way it was worded didn't give people enough options to reveal their actual preferences in the poll. So false dilemma, it can be seen in all kinds of different everyday social contexts, and also in the results of some, polling and other information that we encounter in the media and in the public life. So that's false dilemma. Okay. All right, so then next up is the questionable cause fallacy. Okay, so questionable cause is, the name kind of is a giveaway again, but with questionable cause, a person assumes without good evidence that one thing is the cause of another. Okay, so I'll write it here. When one assumes without good evidence that one thing is the cause of another. Questionable cause. So sometimes people like to make connections between events that have nothing to do with each other. And sometimes superstition leads to this tendency. So like a person has this belief that when they wear like a lucky shirt or something or hat, that benefits their favorite sports team. So like a big fan of the Dodgers or whatever, they feel like they've got to wear their lucky LA Dodgers hat and when the game is being played, because if they don't, it's bad luck for the team. Okay, so suppose that they lost the hat or something, or they left it at their friend's house, and so they're watching the game without the hat, and then the team loses, and what would be their questionable cause conclusion here? I knew it. I knew that I should have gone back to retrieve the hat because I didn't wear it, and then they lost, and so that's part of the reason why they lost. Now, can we all agree that that has no at all effect on the performance of the athletes on the field? Like, they can't possibly be affected by a person far distant in time and space with regard to their choice of wardrobe. Okay, so, questionable cause right there. While we're on the topic of baseball and superstitious beliefs, let's talk about another one. Okay, so Babe Ruth, you guys probably know who that is, one of the great all-time Hall of Famers in baseball. So what he did was he played for the let me get the teams right. Yeah, he played for the Boston Red Sox for a long time, and then later in his career, he was traded off to the New York Yankees. And he hated that trade, right? He didn't want to leave the Boston Red Sox. So he said, and he told the media and everything, I'm putting a curse on the Boston Red Sox. So this is the Babe Ruth curse. So let it be. Let it be that they will never win the World Series. And so he put the curse on in 1920 when they sold him to the Yankees. And then they had 84 years of kind of futility. They did not win the World Series for 84 years until 2004, when they had a pretty impressive comeback victory. But prior to that, everyone said, oh, it's the curse of Babe Ruth. That's the cause of it. He put the curse on him, and then you can see that they didn't make, the championship for 80 some odd years. But obviously their performance could not have anything to do with, the statements or actions of a man long gone in the past. It has everything to do with the composition of the team, the opponent, conditions on the field, and everything else. So when we assess cause and effect, we got to make sure there's a reliable and realistic connection between one thing and another. Sometimes this in Latin, it has a kind of convoluted Latin name, which is post hoc ergo propter hoc. And what that means is coming after and therefore being caused by the thing that came before. So it's sort of like a person's thought process is, if A comes before B, then A must be the cause of B. But it's not just because something happens first that it causes something else. Like I was born back in the 80s, now we have this pandemic. Did my birth cause the pandemic because it happened first and now the pandemic happened afterwards? No, the two events, although chronologically they played out in that time sequence, they have no connection to each other at all. So questionable cause, that's how it works. Maybe another example from the book. This is a funny fact that I didn't really know before teaching this class, but surely you guys have probably heard of the actress and singer Jennifer Lopez, J-Lo, right? She's been around for quite a while. Well, her mom, Guadalupe Lopez, she won $2 million on a slot machine gambling in Atlantic City at the casino. And I mean, that's kind of an interesting fact because these people are already millionaires, and so just throw a couple more on the pile by winning the slot machine. But anyway, she had the superstitious belief that if she said a little lucky charm right before she pulled the lever, that would help her win. And on that one occasion, she did. She said a little good luck incantation, pulled the lever, and then she was definitely convinced. I knew that was the reason why I won. But we can't, of course, be satisfied with that as a reason, because if this was true and you could simply reliably win by uttering a mantra before you pull the lever, then people would discover this and be able to do it systematically, and then Vegas would, of course, no longer have, the house would always lose, and they would go bankrupt, and they could no longer be profitable. So clearly, we have enough experience and knowledge to know that that's not the cause. But people like to assign causes. A black cat crosses your path, and then you get into a car accident later, and you're like, I knew it was bad luck, a bad omen from this cat, or walked under a ladder or broke a mirror. But that's just silly, and a critical thinker would know better. So, questionable cause fallacy. Okay. So we move now to there's two more, and so next it's the slippery slope fallacy. Okay, so slippery slope. So this is the mistaken idea. Oh, there was a West Wing episode, post hoc ergo propter hoc. Well then, Ryan, now that you know a little bit more about the definition of the concept, maybe it'll illuminate some element of the plot. Was there like a weird, like causal reasoning going on in that episode? Someone was like trying to figure out why something happened and doing a poor job of it, maybe? I don't know. Well, you'll let me know someday, perhaps. But to the slippery slope, it's the mistaken idea that if one type of action is either taken or permitted, that eventually all actions of this type will be either taken or permitted. Okay, so And eventually all actions of this type will be taken or permitted. Both. Okay, so slippery slope. Sometimes people have unjustified assessments of negative outcomes that would result if one type of action is allowed. And the slippery slope fallacy is all about that. So you should think of this fallacy together with like a visual, because the fallacy's name is taken from like a visual sequence that you can imagine. So you got to imagine like a person standing on top of a high hill, and this hill has slopes that just slope down from where they're standing. Where they're at right now on the top is a secure position. They've got their footing, but it's like this. You're warning the person, do not take a step down that slope, because it may seem like it's just one little step right now, but once you take that little step and once you start down the slope, there's no turning back, and what you're going to do is you're going to slip because it's slippery, and you're going to cascade down the slope, incurring worse and worse injuries as you make that, painful journey down towards the bottom. So basically, don't even take the one step. The one step isn't going to stop there. It's going to lead to like a snowball effect of worse and worse things of the same kind, until eventually we're at the bottom of the slope and with a bunch of broken limbs and all of that, Now, that would be like a literal slippery slope, but, as a metaphor of a fallacy, it's something like this. Okay, so parent is getting parenting advice from somebody else, and they say, hey, I see you over there with your kid, and they're begging you for a candy bar at the store, but don't give in. Don't give in to them. I know they're saying they want it, and it looks so tasty, but you got to be tough with these kids, because if you give in to them right now while they're begging for candy, it may seem like a nice thing now, but what it's going to lead to is later on down the line, they're going to be spoiled rotten. They're not going to be able to ever accept no for an answer. And then later on in their life, they're going to manipulate and exploit people because they won't be able to deal with not getting what they want. And, then they might end up committing crimes or being in bad, abusive relationships. You don't want that for your child, right? So don't give them the candy bar. It's a slippery slope towards total lack of self-control. Now, is that really true? Probably not. I mean, a one-off occasion where you grant the request of a child is not likely to lead to some kind of wholesale loss of self-control and no ability to delay gratification to the future. So, like, for one example, maybe a bigger, like a social circumstance, when, so in 2015, when the Supreme Court decided that same-sex marriage is a guaranteed right by the U.S. Constitution, there were a lot of arguments being made, and some people thought that the argument against legalization of same-sex marriage was like a slippery slope argument. Some people would say, well, if gay people are allowed to marry each other, that opens the door to non-traditional versions of marriage, and it's not going to stop there. Pretty soon people will be able to marry inanimate objects, their pets, themselves, and that will just usher in like a weird dystopian version of society. We can't have that, so don't allow for the one policy to be changed. But obviously, all those like dystopian projections and, predictions have not come to pass, and there's no real evidence that they would, so that's a slippery slope argument. Or like allowing gays to serve in the military. I think these are both mentioned in the book, so I'm kind of using some of their examples. But some people argue that by allowing openly gay people to serve in the military, it's going to affect the cohesion of the fighting forces, and that's going to, the loss of unit cohesion is going to make us more vulnerable to attack, and eventually that's going to undermine our effectiveness of our fighting forces, and we could be overruled and overtaken by invading countries. But that's yet again a slippery slope argument. There's no realistic reason to think that all those foretold consequences will proceed from the one action. Sometimes people say, watch out for the development of artificial intelligence. You've heard even smart people say this. Elon Musk, Stephen Hawking, the idea is, well, we're building these really intelligent computers that can play video games with us, or that can, talk to us, or that can like even write songs or screenplays and engage in realistic communication. It seems like it's cool because it's allowing us to offset all this human intellectual labor to the machines. But watch out, because it's putting us on a slippery slope to, I don't know, what kind of future slippery slope outcome do you think someone worries about when they warn not to develop AI? Don't develop the AI, artificial intelligence, because it's a slippery slope to where, you think? What could be the argument here? What's the reason not to do that? Shouldn't we have smart computers? Well, some people might think no, and they could give the slippery slope reasoning of what kind? What's the fearful, forewarned result that we don't want to get to if we start developing smarter and smarter computers and machines? Anybody? Well, maybe you'll let me know as you get to it, but what I was trying to fish around for, oh yeah, AI taking over the world, good Caesar, right? Like, so killer robots, Terminator, Skynet. There's no necessary reason to think that just by having better computing systems that can more realistically engage with human beings and do more human actions, it's going to lead to that. Okay, so let me see if there's more in the book to add. So yeah, you should never give in to your child. If you do, soon they'll be wrapped around you'll be wrapped around their finger. If we allow any form of human cloning, then before we know it, there will be armies of clones taking over our jobs. The first argument, there's no credible evidence that giving into a child's demands once in a while will lead to them dominating us. The second argument regarding the effect of human clones is also implausible. Much of the concern about human cloning leading us down the slippery slope to armies of clones taking over the world is based on inaccurate information. Yeah, and then some people oppose certain government policies on the grounds that they're a moral hazard that would lead to a slippery slope towards communism, as given in this example. Government bailout will encourage businesses to be irresponsible and take absurd risks. If we allow them, we will end up having to bail out every business in the nation until we end up under communism. Kind of heard arguments like that about the warning against giving subsidized income during the pandemic. People are like, oh, well, you know, it might be nice during the pandemic, but it's going to remove people's incentive to want to return to work. They're going to be used to receiving a stipend from the government, and after a while, this undermines the industriousness of the economy, and we end up requiring permanent subsidy. But, you know, again, it's a slippery slope. More on this? Well, yeah, I think that's probably a decent rundown of the various, some good examples. So we're going to go on to the last one. Just have one more today, and that's all the fallacies. So the last one is called naturalistic fallacy. Okay, the naturalistic fallacy is just the assumption that whatever is natural must be good, and whatever is somehow unnatural must be bad, and that's it. So okay, naturalistic fallacy. So we, for some reason, as human beings, have a lot of us this idea that something that's given by nature, that just naturally occurs, can't be a bad thing. Maybe it's bound up with certain, I don't know, assumptions about divine providence or something, but at any rate, it's just not true that anything that's given by nature is good. It's also not true that anything that is man-made or artificial or not found in nature is bad. Okay, so like right now, you're watching this lecture using extraordinary technology. You know, it's a computer, and we're using cameras, and we're broadcasting this across broadband devices and across telecommunication systems that didn't exist, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So none of the stuff we're doing right here could be called natural in a sense, right? It's not like it grows out of the ground, these computers, doesn't fall out of the sky. It's not something that just occurs naturally. But that does not mean it's something bad. Obviously, technology, that humans have made has allowed us to improve our lives, our quality of lives, our lifespans, and our options and opportunities, as human beings. So like, unless you really want to give back, all the electronics, all the GPS systems, all of the transportation systems and plumbing and heating systems and air conditioning and everything else, you can't really say consistent with those things that you value that everything that's not natural is bad. People say similar things about like vaccines, right? Vaccine doesn't come out of the ground. It's not growing on a tree. It's made in a lab, and therefore it must be something that's not good for us. But if you refuse to take them, you're going to make yourself much less healthy and safe than a person who's willing to do that. So sometimes things that are not natural can be good for you. Not like all the time, obviously. There's like, nuclear bombs and stuff, and there's radiation and all of that. That's probably not a good thing, and it's not natural. But you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, right? Next time you get sick, if you take an aspirin or a Tylenol to deal with some pain relief, that's not necessarily a bad thing at all, but it's not found naturally either. And then nature itself gives us a lot of things that are not great. Earthquakes, hurricanes, a pandemic. This stuff all comes out of nature. In a way, the story of mankind is almost like the story of gradually overcoming the limitations foisted upon us by nature, and kind of, in a way, having greater control over it, using our intelligence and our technology. So, sometimes marketers and advertisers will use our tendency to think in terms of the naturalistic fallacy by marketing products to us and using the sales pitch of, well, it's natural. So like if you can put a label on it that says natural or green or whatever, then sometimes a person will think it's good for you, even if the product itself is not. Like tobacco companies will sometimes release a new version of like all organic tobacco or like not synthetically grown, small batch, local farm tobacco, but it's still got the same, addictive properties, tar, carcinogens, and everything else, despite those facts. So yeah, let me see what else here is in the book on the same topic. So like here they talk about so like it's natural, like the sexual organs that people are born with naturally are given to reproduce. So it must be that gay people are bad because they do something that's not found in the state of nature. Yet another example of a naturalistic fallacy. Advertisers may get us to try to conclude that their product is good or healthy simply because it's natural. An ad can claim 100% natural tobacco, but it doesn't follow that it's good for us. All tobacco is natural, but that does not make it healthy. Arsenic, tsunamis, and viruses are also natural, but we don't consider them to be healthy and desirable. If you got a tough diagnosis of like cancer or something, and the doctor said your best chance to go into remission and beat the cancer would be to take a very aggressive course of treatment involving like chemotherapy and radiation, and you said, yeah, but that stuff's not natural. I want to just go with like a holistic medicine and kind of change up my diet or something. That's not necessarily going to lead you to the result that you want. So it takes careful judgment on a case-by-case basis whether anything is a good or bad thing, or helpful or harmful. And you can't just make the blanket assumption without better specific facts that everything natural is a good thing and everything unnatural is a bad thing. People say that about drugs too. They'll be like, well, don't tell me cocaine is so bad because doesn't it just grow out of the ground? It's a coca leaf. So God put it here or something for us to use. So it can't be that bad. But yes, it certainly can. It's the same kind of substance that makes that really messed up powdered drug that can make people addicted, lose their health, lose their judgment, and so forth. So we're not saying that everything natural is bad or that everything unnatural is good, but that you have to look at the case and determine the facts based on the individual example. So in general then, now we're closing this whole topic of fallacies. And here's what I would suggest to you guys as you prepare for Tuesday, because we'll have a little quiz on Tuesday. The format is going to be just the same as we had before with the midterm and with the earlier first quiz. You'll get the distribution of the test form sent to you through our notification system, and then you get like a class period basically to return your answers back. The front page of the quiz is going to have examples of fallacies written down, and then you're going to have to give the name of it, kind of like how the recent homework was. But it's not just going to be limited to the relevance fallacies. It's going to be all three categories. So what you should probably do is try to formulate some decent examples of all the different fallacies so that you have access to that. And then maybe create a list of all 20 so that you can sort of drill yourself about what they look like, what the definitions are. There's 5 fallacies of ambiguity, 8 fallacies of relevance, 7 fallacies of unwarranted assumptions. So the total number of all of them is 20. The front page will say, name this fallacy, and then the back page will say, provide me an example of this type of fallacy. So there's both identification and the creation of examples, and that's how your quiz is going to be on Tuesday. So when it comes to fallacies overall, the best way to avoid them is listen carefully to other people and make sure that when they commit a fallacy that you're able to point it out. Also, try not to be vague or ambiguous in the way that you state information. Try to be as precise as possible so that there's no room for misinterpretation or for you to be accused of a fallacy by other people. Try not to confuse the character of the person who you're having a debate with the topic that you guys are debating. Sometimes you don't like a person's position. Sometimes you don't like their viewpoints. But that doesn't mean that you have to disrespect them on a personal level or think less of their character. It's good to keep those things separate, right? Have a healthy respect for other people just because we're all human beings. And if you don't like what a person is saying, then that's the thing to attack, but not them. And then also, just don't be so obsessed with winning every argument. Sometimes we commit fallacies because we just don't want to make any concessions on our own views, and we then resort to the fallacious arguments to try and support ourselves when we've run out of a better case to make. So don't be so obsessed with winning every argument. Sometimes just think about learning from the other person and learning about their attitude, because I think sometimes stubborn resistance to having your views changed can lead you to make weird arguments that are just bad. And that's another reason that this happens a lot, because people hate being wrong and they hate being pointed out that they may have made an error in their judgment. But a good critical thinker is not afraid to be wrong sometimes because they always want to learn and do better. So, all right, well, I guess that's all I've really got for us today. That's the end of the fallacy chapter. So after Tuesday, when you take your guys' quiz, then we move on and we'll start talking about advertising and marketing in the media. So that'll be our focus for about a week or so after the quiz. All right, guys. So thanks so much again. Be in touch with me. I'll be in touch with you guys over the weekend. All of the assignments will be graded that you've done so far as of tomorrow. And then I invite you to send me an email to get your score. But remember, again, that you have to check in with me for those scores. I prefer to have a dialogue with students to kind of keep that going. Okay, guys, have a great one then, and enjoy. I'll be watching the debates tonight. As a critical thinker, I find it interesting that we're in an election season, so maybe some of you, just as citizens or just as students of this class, will find that interesting too. But have a great night, and yeah, I'll see you after the weekend. Take care.